So think about the ground beneath your feet right now, like literally right now.
Yeah, we really don't think about it much, do we?
No, not at all. I mean, we pour concrete over it, we build our houses on it, maybe plant a vegetable garden, but we rarely stop to consider the actual history trapped inside the dirt.
Right, it's just dirt to most people.
Exactly. But the soil, especially beneath industrial facilities and, well, even our own neighborhoods, it's basically a giant sponge. It serves as this historical record. It remembers every chemical spill, every leaking pipe, every industrial failure over the last century.
Oh, absolutely. It holds on to all of it.
And so today, we are going on a deep dive into tactical environmental intelligence.
I love that term.
Right. It sounds intense because it is. We're looking at how experts actually hunt down these toxic secrets buried in our backyards. We've got a pretty diverse stack of sources for this, too.
We really do.
Yeah, we're pulling from dense Texas administrative code, ASTM engineering standards, a really sobering report on the 2005 BP Texas City Refinery disaster, and an EPA guide on cleaning up groundwater with, get this, vegetable oil.
Which is still wild to me.
I know. We'll get to the vegetable oil, I promise. But our mission today is to figure out what happens when refineries ignore unseen dangers, how we test the dirt, and how scientists are creating massive underground buffets to clean it all up.
So hunting down those toxic secrets, it really requires a fundamental shift in how we interact with the environment. Because before anyone can even attempt to clean up a site or understand the danger it poses to the community, they have to know exactly what that sponge has absorbed.
Right. You can't fight what you can't see.
Exactly. And in the commercial and environmental sectors, this investigation is broken down into very specific phases.
Yeah, the first phase is essentially just a reconnaissance mission. Like if someone is buying a commercial property, they begin with a Phase I environmental site assessment.
And that Phase I, it's completely non-intrusive. Nobody's digging it.
Right. Investigators are acting more like historical detectives. They're looking at old fire insurance maps, reviewing state databases, interviewing past owners, just trying to see if there's a potential that some previous business left something nasty behind.
But if that Phase I assessment uncovers a red flag, say they find records of an old dry cleaner on the corner, or maybe an undocumented underground fuel tank, then the whole investigation escalates to Phase II.
And Phase II is where things get real.
Oh, for sure. This is governed by the ASTM E1903 standard, and it's where the physical engagement actually begins. Investigators bring in drill rigs, bore deep into the earth, pull up physical soil samples. They even test the vapor trapped in the dirt and then send it all to a lab.
Which makes sense. I mean, the goal is to confirm if the contamination is actually there, what kind of chemical it is, and exactly how far it's spread, right?
Exactly. I like to connect this to the concept of military readiness.
Oh, yeah, expand on that a bit.
Well, think about it. A military doesn't just send troops into an unpredictable environment without logistical preparation and intelligence gathering. You need to know what's out there. A Phase II assessment is basically the logistical readiness for public health.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's the intelligence gathering operation that you have to do to mitigate an environmental risk before it, reaches the groundwater or drifts into a residential neighborhood.
So to really understand how that intelligence is gathered, we have to look at the physical mechanics of the dirt itself, because soil is incredibly complex.
It really is. It's not just a solid block of brown stuff.
Right. The sources had this really great analogy, the cereal bowl analogy. So imagine a bowl of dry cereal. The cereal flakes, those represent the solid rocks and minerals in the ground.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now pour milk into the bowl. The milk filling the gaps between the flakes, that's the groundwater, and the empty space near the top of the bowl where there isn't any milk, that represents the soil gas.
Right, the air trapped in the dirt.
Exactly. So if you take a spoonful of dye and pour it into that bowl representing a chemical spill, it doesn't just spread in a perfect uniform circle.
Oh, definitely not.
Some of the dye sticks directly to the flakes, some of it dissolves into the milk and just flows away, and some sinks straight to the bottom of the bowl.
And what's fascinating is that the type of soil completely dictates how that chemical moves. Like, particle size matters so much. If a chemical spills onto sandy soil, it hits a freeway.
A freeway?
Yeah, because sand particles are large, meaning the gaps between them are really wide. Water and liquid pollutants can travel through sand incredibly fast, spreading a spill over a massive area in just a fraction of the time.
Wow. Okay, so what about clay then?
Clay is the exact opposite. Clay particles are microscopic, and more importantly, they carry a natural electrical charge.
Wait, really? Dirt has an electrical charge?
Yeah. When a chemical, particularly like a heavy metal, hits a clay layer, the clay acts like a blockade. The electrostatic charge actually grabs onto the contaminant and traps it tightly.
That is wild.
Right. And because of this massive variation between sand and clay, the rules governing how environmental investigators test soil are incredibly rigid. Like looking at the Texas Administrative Code, specifically 30 Tex Admin, Code 222.157, an investigator can't just scoop up a handful of surface dirt and call it a day.
No, I imagine they'd need to be way more precise.
They are legally forced to test highly specific depth zones. They have to take separate samples from 0 to 12 inches down, and then another set from 12 to 24 inches down.
Oh, wow.
And they have to measure pH levels, conductivity, trace elements, because a chemical's behavior changes dramatically depending on how deep it has sunk and what kind of soil it hits.
Well, wait, if clay acts like a blockade that traps chemicals, doesn't that make it almost impossible to get out once it's in? Like if it's trapped in these highly localized pockets, finding that chemical is like finding a needle in a haystack.
That is the exact nightmare investigators face. Environmental engineers refer to this challenge as heterogeneity.
Which basically just means uneven distribution, right?
Exactly, because soil beneath the surface is this chaotic mix of layered sand pockets and dense clay walls, contamination pools in highly unpredictable shapes.
So you could easily miss it.
Oh, absolutely. An investigator could drill a soil boring, pull up a sample, and find completely clean dirt. But if they had just moved their drill rig, say, 3 feet to the left, they might have hit a massive trapped pocket of toxic sludge.
Wow. So missing that spot by just a few inches leads to a false negative.
And that gives everyone a dangerous sense of false security.
That's terrifying. Well, we've talked about finding the hidden dangers already trapped in the soil, but we also really need to look at how that poison gets there in the first place.
Right, the root cause.
Yeah. Often it's because industrial facilities are ignoring a different kind of unseen danger, the ticking time bombs hidden in their own engineering.
Oh, yeah.
When a facility loses its readiness and ignores the warning signs, the soil and the people standing on top of it absorb the catastrophic consequences.
And the clearest, probably most tragic example of a facility losing its readiness happened on March 23, 2005, at the BP Texas City Refinery.
Yeah, the sources on this were incredibly heavy. It remains one of the deadliest industrial accidents in recent U.S. history.
It does. And the mechanics of the failure, it's basically a master class in what happens when safety culture completely breaks down.
So the incident started in a section of the refinery designed to boost the octane rating of gasoline, the isomerization or isom plant. The operators were initiating the startup of this massive distillation tower.
Right, a 170-foot-tall column used to separate chemical mixtures by boiling them.
And from what I understand, a startup procedure is universally recognized as one of the most volatile and dangerous times for any refinery. It requires absolute total precision.
It does. But on this specific morning, the level transmitter, which is a critical instrument designed to tell the control room exactly how much highly flammable liquid is inside that 170-foot tower, was completely uncalibrated. It was broken.
That's insane.
Right. A distillation tower relies on a very specific balance of liquid and vapor space to function safely. If operators do not know the actual liquid level, they are essentially flying blind.
And to make matters worse, the operator running the startup was working his 30th consecutive 12-hour shift.
30th. Let that sink in.
It's unbelievable fatigue. So for hours, they pumped this highly volatile, flammable liquid into the column. The broken gauge in the control room indicated the liquid was sitting at a perfectly safe level of about 9 feet.
But in reality, the tower was continuously filling. The liquid had reached 158 feet.
158 feet. It was almost completely full.
The tower was entirely full of boiling hydrocarbons. And eventually, the internal pressure just became too massive for the system to contain. The automatic relief valves at the top of the tower blew open.
And over 51,900 gallons of boiling, flammable liquid violently overflowed.
Now, in a modern refinery, that overflow would be directed to a flare system. A flare safely burns off the excess chemicals high up in the atmosphere.
But BP wasn't using a flare system here. They were utilizing this terribly outdated piece of equipment called a blowdown stack.
Right.
Which was essentially just a giant open exhaust chimney pointing straight up into the sky, sitting right in the middle of the active refinery.
So instead of burning off safely, a 20-foot geyser of boiling chemicals shot out of the top of the open stack. It rained down on the ground and instantly vaporized into this massive, highly flammable cloud.
And then this vapor cloud drifted across the plant and encountered an idling diesel pickup truck. And the mechanics of what happened next, it's just terrifying.
Yeah, explain the diesel engine part because that is crucial.
So diesel engines don't use spark plugs. They rely on pulling in air and compressing it until it ignites the fuel.
Right, it's all about compression.
Exactly. So when that idling truck sucked the highly flammable vapor cloud into its air intake, the engine suddenly had an unlimited fuel source from the outside air.
It began to run away.
Yes. The engine revved completely out of control, oversped, backfired, and provided the ignition source for the entire vapor cloud.
And the resulting explosion shattered windows up to 3/4 of a mile away. 15 workers were killed instantly, and 180 were injured.
And the most tragic detail of those 15 fatalities, none of them were even working on the unit that exploded.
No. They were contractors. They were sitting in temporary office trailers that BP had allowed to be placed just 121 feet away from the open blowdown stack.
121 feet, it's just devastating. So the U.S. Chemical Safety Board and the Baker Panel did these massive investigations, and they dug into the root causes, revealing a deeply, deeply broken system.
BP was suffering from a severe culture of cost-cutting. Auditors literally described it as a checkbook mentality. Equipment was knowingly left broken, maintenance budgets had been slashed by millions, and structural warning signs were ignored for years.
It sounds like driving a car where the fuel gauge is broken, the check engine light has been on for years, and the brakes are cut and deciding to floor it anyway.
That is the perfect analogy. And the independent panel uncovered this really crucial distinction that explains how a major corporation let this happen. BP's safety culture was entirely focused on occupational safety.
Occupational safety, like slips, trips, and falls.
Exactly. They were tracking slips, making sure everyone wore their hard hats, holding onto handrails, and they actually achieved excellent metrics in occupational safety.
But they completely neglected process safety.
Right. Process safety is the management of complex engineering hazards. It's monitoring pipe thickness, calibrating relief valves, making sure containment systems are modernized to prevent massive chemical releases. They were tracking the wrong metrics, creating an illusion of safety while the engineering itself was failing.
Wow. And this tragedy, it really forced the American Petroleum Institute to fundamentally rewrite the rules for the industry.
It did. They mandated stringent new standards for depressuring systems. They created strict zoning rules, prohibiting temporary trailers from being placed near hazardous processing areas.
Which seems so obvious now.
Right. And they introduced comprehensive fatigue management protocols. So shift workers aren't making highly complex engineering decisions on their 30th consecutive shift.
Okay, so while an explosion of that magnitude is a sudden, violent event that forces immediate industry change, danger doesn't always announce itself with a shockwave.
No, it doesn't. Sometimes the danger in the soil is incredibly slow, quiet, and sitting right in a residential backyard.
This is especially true in the Gulf Coast region, specifically around Houston. This area presents a really unique environmental landscape. You have these incredibly dense petrochemical processing facilities operating right alongside residential neighborhoods.
Right.
And that proximity is heavily exacerbated by a historical lack of formal urban zoning. Industry and daily life are practically sharing the same fence line.
Which is such a wild concept for a lot of people to grasp.
Yeah.
To measure the long-term impact of this proximity, researchers from Texas A&M University conducted this comprehensive environmental study in Houston's Greater Fifth Ward.
And the methodology of this study is what makes it so impactful, I think. The researchers didn't just walk into the neighborhood in hazmat suits and start taking dirt.
No, they utilized citizen science.
Yes. They partnered directly with the residents. Locals acted as block captains, organizing their neighbors, securing permissions, and working alongside the scientists to physically collect 193 soil samples right out of people's front yards and community spaces.
That's actually brilliant, building that trust.
It really is. But the laboratory analysis of those 193 samples, it revealed toxic levels of heavy metals trapped in the topsoil, specifically lead, barium, and chromium.
And to understand the scale of the issue, the median level of lead detected in residential yards was 1,200 milligrams per kilogram.
1,200?
Yeah. And in areas specifically designated for children to play, it hit 400 milligrams per kilogram.
Which is still incredibly high.
Oh, the median level for the entire state of Texas is vastly lower than that.
Yeah. And if you live in one of these neighborhoods or if you have kids playing in the dirt, this is where the biology gets terrifying. Because children are the most vulnerable population to topsoil contamination.
Right, because of, hand-to-mouth habits.
Exactly. They touch the dirt, they put their fingers in their mouths, and a child's developing body will absorb up to 90% of the lead they swallow.
90%. Wow.
Yeah. The human body often mistakes lead for calcium, so it allows it to bypass natural defenses and settle directly into developing bones and the brain. It leads to irreversible cognitive decline, lowered IQs, and severe organ damage.
Which circles us back to the logistical problem of clay soil we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
If a dense residential community is built on soil that has tightly trapped heavy metals like lead for decades, removing that threat is a monumental challenge.
Right. I was wondering about that. If a whole residential neighborhood has lead trapped in its soil where kids play, how on earth do you clean that up without bulldozing everyone's yard?
Well, environmental agencies operate under strict regulatory frameworks to address this, like the Texas Risk Reduction Program, or TRP. When an investigator confirms that a site's contamination exceeds protective concentration levels, the operators have to choose a specific remedy standard.
Okay, so what are the options?
The first option is Standard A. It's a brute force approach, pure pollution cleanup. The objective is to physically remove or completely decontaminate the soil until the pollution is gone.
So basically a dig and haul operation.
Exactly. Excavators dig up the contaminated earth, load it into thousands of dump trucks, and transport it to specialized hazardous waste landfills.
But performing a dig and haul across an entire populated residential neighborhood, that would be highly disruptive, wildly expensive, and probably impossible without displacing the community.
Which forces operators to look at the second option, Standard B, or exposure prevention. Instead of digging the pollution out, they leave it locked in the soil but implement aggressive physical controls.
Like pouring concrete caps over the contaminated yards.
Right, or building subterranean barriers to ensure humans and local wildlife can never physically come into contact with the trapped chemicals.
But, I mean, pouring concrete over a community garden isn't a long-term solution for a healthy neighborhood either.
No, it's not great. And this is where environmental science pushes into highly innovative territory. Because instead of digging up the dirt with heavy machinery or capping it under concrete, scientists use biology.
Yes. This is my favorite part of the research. Bioremediation.
It's amazing stuff.
It is brilliant. Scientists utilize a technique called bioaugmentation, where they inject specific microscopic organisms, like native bacteria, directly into the contaminated ground.
Which sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
Adding bacteria to fix a problem.
But it works,
Hmm.
because to a human, industrial solvents and petroleum spills are highly toxic. But to these specific microbes, those chemicals are the primary energy source. They literally eat the
I
contamination.
just digest it.
Yeah, the bacteria break the molecular bonds of the toxic hydrocarbons, they digest them, and then they excrete harmless byproducts like trace amounts of water and carbon dioxide.
However, bacteria cannot survive on toxic solvents alone. If the subterranean environment lacks oxygen or essential nutrients, the microbes just won't multiply fast enough to consume a massive chemical spill.
Right, they need a balanced diet.
So to fix this, environmental engineers inject amendments into the ground to build a supply line for the bacteria.
And the scale of this can be incredible. Look at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Officials faced a massive groundwater contamination problem caused by industrial solvents leaking deep into the earth.
Yeah, decades of mechanical work on planes.
Exactly. But instead of excavating the base, they created a massive underground buffet. Over multiple years, engineers injected more than 240,000 gallons of vegetable oil and sodium lactate directly into the groundwater aquifer.
240,000 gallons of vegetable oil, like what you cook with.
Yeah, basically. They pumped it in at depths ranging from 5 to 30 feet below the surface.
That is wild. But the science behind it makes sense. The vegetable oil acted as a slow-release carbon source. It provided the exact nutritional balance the native bacteria needed.
And the micropopulation exploded. As they multiplied, they consumed the toxic industrial solvents right out of the groundwater, effectively cleaning the aquifer without a single shovel touching the surface.
And vegetable oil isn't the only biological tool. Scientists also use phytoremediation.
That's the one with the plants, right?
Right. They employ specific types of deep-rooted plants, like poplars or sunflowers. These plants act like biological straws, drinking contaminated groundwater and pulling heavy metals out of the soil and into their own plant tissue.
Nature is incredible.
It really is. There's also soil vapor extraction, which essentially involves hooking massive industrial vacuum systems up to the ground to pull highly toxic volatile gases directly out of the empty pores between the soil particles.
Getting it out before those gases can seep into the basements of nearby homes.
Exactly. And from a strategic and economic perspective, these in situ, meaning in place methods, are fundamentally changing how we manage environmental disasters.
Oh, I bet.
Treating the soil exactly where it sits is significantly more cost-effective than a massive excavation. It creates almost zero dangerous waste byproducts that have to be managed elsewhere. But most importantly, it allows scientists to neutralize the threat while preserving the surface.
Right, they can clean the soil beneath a neighborhood without tearing up the streets and running dump trucks past an elementary school.
It's a game changer.
It really is.
Yeah.
So this journey through tactical environmental intelligence, it covers an incredible amount of ground. Pun definitely intended.
Nice.
We've seen how investigators use rigid scientific testing to find the invisible threats trapped in the complex layers beneath our feet. We've explored the tragic mechanical failures that occur when industrial facilities prioritize the wrong safety metrics and lose their engineering readiness. We've looked at the quiet, biological reality of legacy pollution sitting in urban yards, and we've examined how scientists are utilizing microscopic armies of bacteria, fueled by hundreds of thousands of gallons of vegetable oil, to heal the earth from the inside out.
Understanding these mechanisms really changes how you interact with the environment around you. Whether you're a commercial developer surveying a new property, an industrial operator monitoring a control board, or someone just planting a vegetable garden in a city lot, knowing what sits beneath the surface empowers you to ask highly informed questions about the history and the safety of the ground you stand on.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, there's one final mechanical reality I've been thinking about, especially when we look at biology as a solution.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Think back to phytoremediation, the process of using plants as biological straws to pull heavy metals out of the dirt and into their leaves and stems.
Right, the sunflowers and poplars.
Yeah. If we use certain plants to suck lead and chromium out of the soil, what happens when autumn arrives and those toxic leaves fall back to the ground? Or what happens when local wildlife, like insects or deer, eat those leaves?
Oh, wow.
Does cleaning the soil inadvertently pull the contamination out of the dirt and push it straight up the local food chain?
That's a fascinating problem.
It is an incredibly complex system, and it is something for you to think about the next time you see a patch of tough weeds stubbornly growing in an empty, forgotten city lot.